Okay, welcome back. This is part 2 of our analytical essays series. In this video, I'll be looking at advanced planning skills for ATAR literature students. And the key learning for this video is around these three things. First of all, decoding the question. We'll be revising that from our part 1 video. Then developing a thesis and turning that thesis into 3 to 4 propositions. So let's start by revising what we said about decoding the question. We first need to identify the verb. For example, analyze, argue, compare, discuss, explore, examine, explain. What is it that the question is asking us to do? Then we need to identify the key syllabus concepts. These could be representation, genre, context, gender, discourse, reading practices, language or intertextuality, and so forth. You'll see that in your syllabus. And then identify the key discriminators. And those are the parts of the question that allow those who know their concepts and their text to shine. So let's look at a past question from 2017. Examine how literary texts offer insights into diverse and unique ways of thinking within a particular place and time. And so let's decode this question. This is an examine question. And the syllabus concepts we're looking at here are the unique ways of thinking, the values and beliefs and ideologies, and those that belong to a particular place and time, and that's the social and cultural context of production. Okay, so we've got these concepts of values, beliefs, ideologies, and context. And the key discriminators here are the diverse and unique ways of thinking and the particular place of time. So it's ways of thinking that went against the norm and different ways of thinking. That's going to be discriminator, and particular place and time. That the successful candidate will be specific about what is the specific, the particular place and time that they're referring to. Okay, so let's develop this into a thesis. And a thesis statement encapsulates your argument in one sentence. So you'll build towards it in your introduction and make it the last sentence of your introduction. So here are some scrap ideas I might be thinking of here for this to break it down. I'm thinking about Hamlet. I'm thinking about his views on death because I'm thinking about ways of thinking that are in the play. His quote, "Conscience does make cowards of us all," rings in my mind. Death and sin, old Hamlet and Ophelia. That's something I might want to think about. The gravedigger gives us a diverse way of thinking, so I'm going to cue that up from the question. Hamlet is a humanist, so you've got this changing ways of thinking. And then you have this clash between the Protestant and the Catholic. These are some ideas that I'd be working through in my head. And let's turn this into a thesis. We probably won't use all these ideas. These are just some thoughts that I'd be going through. And here's a thesis. By reading Hamlet in terms of its representation of ideas about death, we can see how it offers diverse insights from its protagonist and minor characters that cut against the grain of dominant worldviews in Jacobean England. Have I identified the particular place and time? Absolutely. Jacobean England, I've identified that. Have I identified that I'm going to be talking about diverse and unique ways of thinking? I've pointed out that I'm going to be referring to the protagonist and the minor characters and how they cut against the dominant ideas of the time. And I've made sure I've used some of the key words from the question here, the diverse insights. So I've got a thesis here that I can build into an argument. And so from that, I want to be able to develop some propositions. Now, this might be new to you, and it'd be new to students in my own class, where in the past you might have talked about topics and topic sentences, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I've just found over time that a lot of students, when they think about topics, want to talk about bits of a text, like they want to talk about Act 2 or something like that, and they're not really building an argument up. So by changing that word topic to a proposition, it could help you to beef up the middle of your essay. And so a proposition is a statement that supports your thesis. And for this example, we need to offer 4 statements that show that a reading of Hamlet in terms of its representation of death offers insights into more than one way of thinking about the afterlife in England in 1599. Each of these propositions would then need to be supported by evidence and analysis in their paragraphs. So let's work through and see what 4 propositions I could make from my thesis here. The first one I could make is that Through Hamlet, we gain an insight into the tension between Protestant and Catholic worldviews about death, and this emerges from the opening scene with the appearance of the ghost of Hamlet's father. And so I'll then be talking about how in the context, England is Protestant, by law it's Protestant, but this ghost represents a Catholic worldview. The ghost comes from purgatory, which is a very Catholic view of the afterlife. The religious stigma against suicide for both Protestants and Catholics that prevailed in Renaissance England is strongly foregrounded in the play. So Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy represents a scandalous departure from the dominant ways of thinking of the time. Okay, so now I'm talking about unique ways of thinking at the time, ways that cut against the grain, and I've got so much that I could write about from the play. Now, my diverse views. So I've got my unique views, I guess, in part 2 there. In my third body paragraph here, my next proposition is that through the minor characters, Shakespeare was able to be provocative, and through the gravedigger in Act 5, an alternative view about death is offered that challenged the very political fabric of his time and place. And so if you go and look at the gravedigger scene, the Alas Poor Yorick scene, you'll see the gravedigger really challenges the political structures of the time through his discussion of death. Now, I might find under pressure that by the time I get through those 3 paragraphs, I might not have time to finish this because there's a lot in those 3. But if I can squeeze the 4th paragraph in, this is what it might be. While the ghost Hamlet and the gravedigger represent threats to the orthodox views about death in Renaissance England, the play's final scene represents a restoration to the normal order. There's a missing apostrophe there, I know. But I'm going to bring it back together to talk about how that these diverse and unique ways of thinking that cut against the grain represents a kind of chaos, and all the death at the end represents a restoration. And so here are my 4 propositions. You can see here that I'm not really getting lost in bits of the play. These are 4 propositions I can make that support this thesis. That each one of these supports this idea that by reading Hamlet in terms of representations of ideas about death, we can see how it offers diverse insights from its protagonist and minor characters that cut against the grain of dominant worldviews in Jacobean England. Each one of these propositions, I would hope, can support that thesis. So, what can we do with this in terms of revision? Well, this is what we can call our power preparation, our power prep revision. And when you do that, you take a past paper, pick a question, develop a thesis from a question, then write 4 propositions, then seek feedback on that. You don't need to write complete essays in your revision. Sometimes creating these skeletons of your essay will do it, because it is really about the thinking that goes into constructing an essay. If you know your text, you'll be able to support any essay. But being able to decode the question and develop these thesis and 4 propositions is really important. And so over the months, build up a bank of power prep responses. Gather text study notes that work across a variety of question types. Turn one into a practice response, and of course, seek feedback. So I hope that's been helpful to you. In our next video, we'll be looking at developing from your thesis into an introduction.